The morning air in the Galactic Academy felt heavy with nervous energy. Students from 12 different worlds sat in their seats waiting for Professor Vextai to begin the class. Combat psychology was not an easy subject and today felt different somehow. Jiho sat in the back row as he always did. The human student preferred to watch and listen rather than speak up. Next to him, his roommate Minho tapped his fingers on the desk. Minho was the opposite of Jiho, always ready to talk, always moving, always eager to jump into any situation. In front of them sat Nari, an Altarian student whose skin looked like living crystal. When she was nervous, small lights would flicker under her transparent skin. Today those lights were dancing fast. Across the room, Doyen used all 4 of his arms to organize his notes. The Zenthari student was always prepared, always organized, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Near the front, Hyan took careful notes in her tablet. She was one of only 5 humans in the entire academy, and she studied everything about the other species. Her goal was to become a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms. Professor Vextai entered the room with his usual heavy steps. The Catherian professor was massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall. His thick gray skin was covered in old battle scars, and his 4 eyes could look in different directions at the same time. He had fought in wars across the galaxy for over 400 years before becoming a teacher. Today, you will do something different, the professor said in his deep voice. Today, you will teach me. The students looked at each other with confusion. They were here to learn from him, not the other way around. Professor Vextai walked to the center of the room and crossed his massive arms. Each species here thinks differently about danger. Each species has different ways to test courage and survival skills. I want to see these differences. He pointed to the wall where a large screen showed the assignment details. You will demonstrate a dangerous game from your homeworld. Not just any game. It must be something that puts the player at real risk. Something that tests how your species deals with fear and danger. Nari's crystal skin flickered brighter. Professor, when you say dangerous, I mean dangerous, Vextai replied firmly. Not pretend danger. Not safe danger. Real danger. The kind that makes your survival instincts scream at you to run away. Doyen raised one of his 4 hands. How dangerous? Are we talking about broken bones, death? The professor's 4 eyes focused on the Zenthari student. That depends on your species. What makes an Altarian afraid might not scare a human. What terrifies a Catherian might seem like a fun game to a Zenthari. He began walking around the room, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. This is not about showing off. This is not about proving how tough you are. This is about showing how your species thinks when facing real danger. How do you make decisions when your life might be at risk? Minho leaned over to whisper to Jiho. This sounds crazy. What kind of dangerous games do we even have? Jiho shrugged but said nothing. He was thinking about the assignment, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle. Professor Vextai continued his explanation. You have 1 week to prepare. You may work alone or with others from your species. The demonstration must last at least 10 minutes. You must explain the rules, show the game, and tell us what it teaches about your people. A student from the back raised a tentacle. Professor, what if someone gets hurt during the demonstration? Then you have chosen well, Vextai replied without emotion. Medical staff will be present, but I will not stop a demonstration just because there is blood. The room fell silent. This was not like other assignments. This was not about writing papers or solving math problems. This was about putting themselves in real danger in front of their classmates. I will go first, the professor announced. Tomorrow I will show you a Catherian trial called the Bone Bridge. You will understand then what I expect from you. As class ended, students gathered in small groups talking excitedly and nervously about the assignment. The Altarians huddled together, their crystal skins pulsing with worried light. The Zenthari students used their multiple arms to gesture rapidly as they discussed options. Jiho walked slowly toward the door, still thinking. Minho caught up with him in the hallway, so what do we do? Minho asked. Rock climbing? Bungee jumping? Motorcycle racing? Those are not games, Jiho replied quietly. Those are just dangerous activities. What's the difference? Jiho stopped walking and looked at his friend. A game has rules. A game has purpose. A game teaches something. They walked past groups of alien students, all discussing their plans. Some species seemed excited about the assignment. Others looked worried or confused. The Catherians probably have some brutal combat trial, Minho said. The Xanthari will probably do something with their poison glands. What do humans have that's actually dangerous but still a game? Jiho did not answer right away. He was remembering stories his grandfather had told him. Stories about old traditions, old ways of testing courage and trust. I have an idea, he finally said. What kind of idea? A simple one. Minho waited for more explanation, but Jiho had already started walking toward their dormitory. Whatever his quiet roommate was thinking, it would probably surprise everyone. Jiho always thought differently than other people expected. That evening, Jiho sat alone in his room, researching old human traditions on his computer. He read about ancient cultures and dangerous games that had been played for thousands of years. Some were about showing physical courage. Others were about proving skill or strength. But one type of game caught his attention. Games that were not about the person taking the risk at all. Games that were about something much more dangerous and much more human. Games that were about trust. The next day, Professor Vextai kept his promise. The entire class watched in shocked silence as he demonstrated the Catherian bone bridge. The massive professor had to balance on narrow metal beams while sharp spikes moved up and down beneath him. One wrong step would mean broken bones or worse. The professor's thick skin was cut in several places by the time he finished. But he showed no pain. This teaches young Catherians to make decisions quickly under pressure, he explained, wiping purple blood from his arm. Fear makes you slow. Slow makes you dead. The demonstrations continued throughout the week. Each species showed something that made the other students gasp or look away. Nari and two other Alterians created a crystal maze that could collapse at any moment. Their transparent bodies glowed bright with stress as they moved through the sharp, unstable passages. One small mistake would cause the entire structure to shatter, sending deadly crystal shards in all directions. This teaches us to sense vibrations and move in harmony, Nari explained afterward, her skin still flickering with nervous energy. Alterians must learn to feel the world around us or we break everything we touch. Doyen's demonstration was even more terrifying. The Xanthari student and his partner released toxic spores into a sealed chamber, then entered without protective gear. They had to complete a complex puzzle, while the poison slowly filled the air. Their forearms moved frantically as the deadly spores made them dizzy and sick. Xanthari bodies can filter many toxins, Doyen gasped when they finally escaped the chamber. But we must learn our limits. We must know how long we can survive in bad environments. Other species showed similar tests. The Vortex students demonstrated combat trials with real weapons. The Helians created fire mazes that could burn them alive. Each demonstration was about pushing individual limits, testing personal skills, or proving individual courage. The human students watched everything with growing worry. How could they compete with such dramatic displays? Maybe we should do something with cars, Minho suggested to Jiho during lunch. Humans love dangerous driving, or extreme sports, Heian added. Rock climbing without ropes or jumping off cliffs. But Jiho shook his head. Those are not really games, and they are not about what makes humans special. What do you mean? Heian asked. Every species here is showing off their natural abilities, Jiho explained. Alterians have crystal senses. Xanthari have poison resistance. Catherians have thick skin and quick reflexes. What natural abilities do humans have? The other humans looked uncomfortable. It was true that humans were not the strongest, fastest, or toughest species in the galaxy. They had no special powers, no natural armor, no built-in weapons, so what do? Minho asked. We show them something no other species has, Jiho said quietly. On the day of the human demonstration, the classroom was packed. Word had spread about the assignment, and students from other classes had come to watch. Everyone was curious to see what the humans would do. Professor Vextai called Jiho to the front of the room. The human student walked slowly to the center, carrying a small cloth bag. He set the bag down and looked at his audience. Our demonstration is called the knife-throwing trust exercise, Jiho announced in his calm voice. Several alien students made confused sounds. Projectile weapons were common throughout the galaxy. Many species used knives, spears, or energy blasts in their combat training. What makes this special? Professor Vextai asked with obvious skepticism. Throwing weapons at targets is basic military training. Because the target is not a practice dummy, Jiho replied. He opened his cloth bag and pulled out 6 sharp metal knives. The target is a person. The room became very quiet. Jiho held up one of the knives so everyone could see. The blade was 8 inches long, sharp enough to cut through bone. One person stands completely still against a wall, Jiho explained. Another person throws knives around their body, creating an outline. The standing person cannot move, cannot flinch, cannot protect themselves in any way. Nari's crystal skin began flashing bright warning colors. That is insane, she said. Why would anyone agree to be the target? Because, Jiho said simply, this game is not about the skill of the knife thrower. It is about trust. Doyen used all four hands to gesture his confusion, but the thrower could miss. The target could be killed. Yes, Jiho agreed. That is what makes it dangerous. Professor Vextai leaned forward in his chair. For the first time since the assignment began, he looked genuinely interested. Continue. Other species build dangerous games around their strengths, Jiho said. Catherians test quick reflexes. Alterians test crystal senses. Centauri test poison resistance. But humans are not the strongest or fastest or toughest species. He paused and looked around the room. So we built games around something else. We built games around choosing to be completely helpless. The alien students exchanged glances. This made no sense from a survival standpoint. Why would any species deliberately make themselves vulnerable? Minho will throw the knives, Jiho announced. I will be the target. Minho stood up from his seat looking nervous. Jiho, are you sure about this? I have only practiced a few times. I trust you, Jiho replied. Those 3 words seemed to hit the alien audience like a physical blow. Professor Vextai's 4 eyes widened. Nari's crystal body went completely dark for a moment. Doyen's 4 hands stopped moving entirely. You trust him, Professor Vextai repeated slowly, even though he might miss and kill. You? Yes. Even though you have no way to protect yourself if something goes wrong, yes. Even though your survival depends completely on another person's skill and judgment, yes. The professor sat back in his chair, studying the human student with new interest. And this is a game that human children play? Teenagers mostly, Jiho replied. It teaches us that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust someone completely. And sometimes that is also the most important thing you can do. He walked to the wall and spread his arms wide. Are you ready, Minho? Minho picked up the first knife, his hand shaking slightly. The entire room held its breath as he took aim at the wall next to Jiho's motionless body. Jiho stood against the wall with his arms spread wide. His body was relaxed, his breathing steady, his eyes closed. He looked like someone taking a peaceful nap, not someone about to have knives thrown at him. Minho held the first knife, his hand trembling slightly. The weight of the blade felt heavier than usual. Every eye in the room was watching him. One small mistake, one tiny error in aim, and his best friend would be seriously injured or dead. Take your time, Jiho said without opening his eyes. I am not going anywhere. The alien students leaned forward in their seats. They had seen dangerous demonstrations all week, but this felt different. This felt wrong in a way that made their survival instincts scream. Minho took a deep breath and threw the first knife. It spun through the air and struck the wall with a solid thunk, embedding itself 2 inches from Jiho's left shoulder. Jiho did not move. He did not even open his eyes. Good, he said calmly. 5 more to go. Nari's crystal skin was pulsing with rapid, panicked light patterns. This is madness, she whispered to the student next to her. He cannot see where the knives are going. He cannot dodge if something goes wrong. Professor Vextai watched with intense focus. His 4 eyes tracked every movement, analyzing the demonstration like a military exercise. But his expression was troubled, as if he was seeing something that did not fit his understanding of survival behavior. Minho threw the second knife. It landed near Jiho's right shoulder, perfectly positioned. Still, Jiho remained motionless against the wall. Why does he not wear armor? Doyen asked quietly. Even thin protection would help if there is an accident. Because armor would defeat the purpose, Heian explained from her seat. She was recording everything on her tablet, but her voice was tense. The point is complete vulnerability. The third knife flew through the air and stuck in the wall near Jiho's left elbow. The fourth knife landed by his right elbow. Minho was doing well, but sweat was running down his face. The pressure was enormous. Halfway through the demonstration, something happened that made everyone gasp. As Minho prepared to throw the fifth knife, his hand began to shake more noticeably. The stress was getting to him. His grip on the knife slipped slightly, and he had to adjust his hold. Any other species would have stopped the demonstration. They would have taken a break, used technology to steady their aim, or at least warned the target about the problem. But Minho just looked at his friend against the wall. Jiho, he said quietly. My hand is shaking. Jiho opened his eyes for the first time since the demonstration began. He looked directly at Minho with a calm smile. I trust you, he said simply. Then he closed his eyes again and became perfectly still. The alien students could not believe what they were seeing. The target knew there was a problem. He knew the risk had increased. But instead of protecting himself or ending the demonstration, he chose to remain completely helpless. Impossible, breathed Professor Vextai. No species would continue under these conditions. Minho steadied himself, took careful aim, and threw the fifth knife. It struck the wall inches from Jiho's left hip, exactly where it was supposed to land. The sixth and final knife completed the outline near Jiho's right hip. When it was over, Jiho was surrounded by 6 sharp blades, each one close enough to have caused serious injury if thrown just slightly off target. Only then did Jiho open his eyes and step away from the wall. He looked completely relaxed, as if nothing dangerous had happened at all. The classroom was silent for a long moment. Then the questions began. How did you stay so calm? Nari asked, her crystal skin still flickering with stress patterns. I would have been terrified. Why did you continue when the thrower's hand started shaking? Doyen demanded. That was clearly more dangerous. What would have happened if he had missed? Asked a Vorthax student from the back. Jiho looked around the room at all the confused, worried faces. You are asking the wrong questions, he said. What do you mean? Professor Vextai asked. You want to know how I stayed calm, why I continued, what would happen if something went wrong? Jiho explained. But those are not the important questions. He gestured toward Minho, who was still holding the last knife. The important question is, why did he keep throwing? The alien students turned to look at Minho, who seemed surprised to suddenly be the center of attention. I do not understand, Nari said. Minho knew his hand was shaking, Jiho continued. He knew the risk had increased. He knew that one mistake could kill his friend. So why did he not stop? Why did he keep throwing knives at someone he cares about? Professor Vexatai was beginning to understand. Because you trusted him to continue. Exactly, Jiho nodded. The person taking the risk was me. But the person under the most pressure was him. I chose to be helpless. That meant he had to be perfect. Minho set down the knife with shaking hands. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, he admitted. Knowing that Jiho's safety depended completely on me, knowing that he trusted me enough to stand there while I threw sharp objects at him. But why? Doyen asked with all 4 hands gesturing frantically. Why put yourselves through this? What does it accomplish? Jiho and Minho looked at each other. They were thinking about all the times they had relied on each other during their time at the academy. All the moments when one had needed the other to be reliable, dependable, trustworthy. It creates a bond, Jiho said finally. When someone trusts you with their life and you do not let them down, something changes between you. You become more than friends. You become people who know they can depend on each other no matter what. Professor Vexatai stood up slowly, his massive frame towering over the human students. And this is how humans build military units? Through games of deliberate vulnerability? Among other things, yes, Jiho replied. For the first time in 400 years of combat experience, Professor Vextai looked genuinely unsettled by something he had witnessed. The classroom erupted in discussion after the human demonstration ended. Students from different species gathered in excited groups, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The noise level rose as everyone talked at once, their voices mixing in a chaos of confusion and amazement. Professor Vextai raised one massive hand for silence. His 4 eyes were still focused on Jiho and Minho, studying them like they were some new form of life he had never encountered before. Explain this to me, the professor said slowly. Your species deliberately creates situations where you are completely helpless, where your survival depends entirely on someone else. And you call this a game? Yes, Jiho replied simply. But this makes no sense from a survival perspective, Nari interrupted, her crystal skin pulsing with rapid thought patterns. Every species in the galaxy evolves to protect itself. We develop armor, weapons, speed, strength, poison resistance. We become harder to kill. She gestured toward the knives still stuck in the wall. But humans do the opposite. You make yourselves easier to kill on purpose. Why would evolution allow this? Jiho thought for a moment before answering. Because sometimes being willing to die for someone makes you both harder to kill. The alien students looked confused by this contradiction. Doyen used all four hands to express his frustration. That makes no logical sense. How does increasing vulnerability improve survival? Let me ask you something, Minho said, stepping forward. When you were doing your demonstrations this week, who were you depending on? Myself, Doyen replied immediately. My own skills, my own abilities. Same here, Nari agreed. Alterian crystal sense is individual. Each of us must develop our own connection to vibrations and frequencies. Exactly, Minho nodded. You were testing individual abilities. Personal skills. Private strengths. He pointed to the outline of knives on the wall. But this game cannot be played alone. It requires two people who trust each other completely. Either one of us could do this demonstration by ourselves. Professor Vextai was beginning to see the larger picture. You are saying that humans evolved cooperation instead of individual strength. Not instead of, Jiho corrected. In addition to, humans can be strong individually, but we become much stronger when we work together. All species work together, a Vorthak student called out from the back. We have armies, fleets, governments. Yes, Heian said, looking up from her tablet where she had been taking notes. But your cooperation is based on hierarchy, discipline, and command structures. Human cooperation is different. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. I have been studying all your species for 3 years. Kitherians follow the strongest leader. Alterians move in harmonic groups where everyone does the same thing. Centauri organize themselves by specialized functions. Professor Vextai nodded. This is normal military organization. Chain of command. Clear roles, defined responsibilities. But humans do something else, Heian continued. We create bonds based on mutual vulnerability. A human soldier will die for his squad not because he is ordered to, but because he trusts them and they trust him. Trust can be broken. Professor Vextai pointed out. Orders cannot. Orders can be disobeyed, Jiho replied. Trust, once truly established, becomes something deeper. He walked over to Minho and put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Minho threw knives at me not because someone commanded him to do it. He did it because I asked him to, and he knew I trusted him completely. Now I would do anything for him and he would do anything for me. But what if he had missed? Nari asked. What if you had been injured or killed? Would you still trust him? Jiho and Minho exchanged a look. It was a question they had discussed before deciding to do the demonstration. If he had missed because he was careless or reckless, then no, Jiho admitted. The trust would be broken. But if he had missed while doing his absolute best while trying as hard as he could to keep me safe, Jiho continued, then the trust would become even stronger, because I would know he cared enough to risk his own emotional pain to help me. Professor Vextai sat down heavily in his chair. In 400 years of military service, he had seen every type of unit cohesion, every form of group loyalty, every kind of soldier bond. But this was something new. You are telling me, he said slowly, that humans become stronger fighters by practicing being victims. We become stronger by practicing absolute trust, Minho corrected. Trust so complete that we will put our lives in each other's hands. And this creates better soldiers than fear-based discipline? The professor asked. Ask any human military commander, Heian suggested. Human units in combat are famous throughout the galaxy for never abandoning each other, for fighting impossible odds when their friends are threatened, for refusing to retreat when it means leaving someone behind. Doyen was using all four hands to calculate something on his tablet. I have been researching human military statistics, he announced. Human units have lower individual survival rates than most species, but they have much higher mission success rates. Because they fight as single organisms instead of groups of individuals, Nari realized, her crystal skin brightening with understanding. Exactly, Jiho nodded. When Minho was throwing those knives, we were not two separate people. We were one unit working together. His success was my success. My safety was his responsibility. We could not fail without both of us failing. Professor Vextai stood up and walked to the wall where the knives were still embedded. He pulled one out and examined the sharp blade. This changes everything I thought I knew about human military psychology, he admitted. I have fought against human forces. I have seen them in action. But I never understood why they fight the way they do. He turned back to face the class. Every other species fights to avoid death. Humans fight as if they are not afraid of death at all. "We are afraid of death," Jiho said quietly. "But we are more afraid of letting down someone who trusts us completely." The room fell silent as the alien students tried to process this information. They were beginning to understand that they had not just witnessed a simple demonstration. They had seen something that explained why humans, despite being physically unremarkable, had become such a significant force in galactic politics and warfare. They had seen the foundation of human strength, and it was unlike anything else in the galaxy. 3 days after the human demonstration, word had spread throughout the entire Galactic Academy. Students from other departments found excuses to visit the combat psychology classroom. Professors from different faculties requested copies of Haon's recordings. The simple knife-throwing exercise had become the most talked-about event of the academic year. Jiho found himself stopped in hallways by curious students asking questions about human psychology. Most of the questions were the same. How could humans function when their entire social structure was based on deliberate vulnerability? "It is not deliberate vulnerability," Jiho tried to explain to a group of Helian engineering students. "It is deliberate trust. The vulnerability is just how we prove the trust is real." But the alien students struggled to understand the difference. Their species had evolved different survival strategies that made complete trust seem impossible or dangerous. Nari was perhaps the most affected by the demonstration. She sought out Jiho during lunch the next day, her crystal skin flickering with complex patterns that showed deep thought. "I have been trying to understand," she said, sitting across from him in the cafeteria. "Alterians trust our crystal networks. We feel vibrations from each other and move in harmony. But what you showed was different. How so?" Jiho asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Our trust is based on shared sensation," Nari explained. "We trust because we can feel what others are feeling. We know their intentions because we sense their emotional vibrations." Her crystal skin dimmed slightly. "But you trusted Minho without any way to sense his emotional state. You could not feel his nervousness or doubt. You had no way to know if he was having second thoughts." "That is what made it real trust," Jiho replied. "Trust that is based on certainty is not really trust at all. It is just calculation." Nari's skin brightened as she processed this idea. "So humans trust despite uncertainty, not because of certainty." "Yes, and that uncertainty is what makes the trust powerful." Meanwhile, Doyen had been conducting his own research project. He approached Jiho and Minho during their evening study session in the library. "I have been analyzing human military tactics for my strategic studies class," he announced, spreading papers across their table with all 4 hands. "I wanted to understand how trust-based cooperation translates to actual combat effectiveness." Minho looked up from his homework. "What did you find?" "Fascinating data," Doyen replied, his eyes bright with excitement. "Human military units show completely different patterns from other species." He pulled out a chart covered in numbers and graphs. Most species organize combat units based on individual specialization. Strong fighters in front, technical specialists in back, commanders safely positioned to give orders. "That makes sense," Jiho said. "Use each individual's strength sufficiently." "But humans do something else entirely," Doyen continued. "Human units mix different specialties together in small groups. Every group has fighters, technicians, medics, and leaders all working side by side, so it means every human soldier has to trust every other human soldier to do their job perfectly," Doyen explained. "A human medic stands next to a human fighter because the fighter trusts the medic to keep him alive, and the medic trusts the fighter to keep him safe." Minho was beginning to understand. "It is like the knife-throwing exercise, but in real combat." "Exactly." Doyen's 4 hands gestured enthusiastically. "Every human military action is based on the same principle you demonstrated. People putting their lives completely in each other's hands." The research was attracting attention from the Academy's senior faculty. Professor Vextai found himself called to meetings with military strategists who wanted to understand the implications of human trust-based combat psychology. This explained several battlefield mysteries, admitted General Korth, a veteran Catherian commander. "Human units often fight far beyond the point where retreat would be logical. They take casualties that would break other species' morale." Professor Vextai nodded grimly. "Because retreating would mean abandoning someone who trusts them completely. They would rather die than break that trust." "But this creates a tactical vulnerability," General Korth pointed out. If you can break the trust bonds within a human unit, the entire group becomes ineffective. Yes, Professor Vextai agreed. But good luck doing that. The trust bonds are incredibly strong once established. A week after the demonstration, Heian published her analysis in the Academy's Xenopsychology journal. Her paper, titled Voluntary Vulnerability as Evolutionary Advantage, Trust-Based Cooperation in Human Social Structures, became required reading in several departments. The conclusions were startling. While other species had evolved physical or mental advantages for survival, humans had evolved a social advantage. Their willingness to be completely vulnerable with trusted individuals created unbreakable group bonds that made the entire species more resilient. Individual humans are not particularly impressive, Heian wrote in her conclusion, but humans in trust-bonded groups become something entirely different. They become willing to face any danger, accept any risk, and fight any enemy to protect each other. The most unexpected result came 3 weeks later. Nari approached Jiho with an unusual request. "I want to learn," she said simply. "Learn what?" "The knife-throwing game. I want to understand what it feels like to trust someone that completely." Jiho was surprised. "Nari, your crystal physiology is different from humans. The psychological effects might not be the same." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But I want to try." That afternoon, a small group gathered in an empty classroom. Nari stood against the wall while Jiho prepared to throw the first knife. But before he could begin, she stopped him. "Wait," she said. "This feels wrong. What do you mean?" Nari's crystal skin was flickering with rapid patterns. "You are skilled at knife throwing. You have practiced. If I am going to truly understand human trust, I need to trust someone who might fail." She turned to Heian, who had been watching from a chair nearby. "Will you throw the knives?" Heian's eyes widened. "Nari, I have never thrown a knife in my life. I could seriously hurt you." "I know," Nari replied. "That is why I am asking you." Heian stood up slowly, her face pale. She looked at the sharp blade in her hand, then at her friend standing against the wall. "Nari, I trust you," she said quietly. Professor Vextai watched the second demonstration from the doorway, having heard about it from other students. As Heian threw the first knife with shaking hands, and Nari remained perfectly still despite her crystal skin flashing with fear patterns, the old warrior finally understood. This was not just about trust between individuals. This was about a species that had weaponized vulnerability itself, a species that became stronger by accepting weakness, safer by embracing danger, and more united by practicing division. In 400 years of combat experience across the galaxy, Professor Vextai had never encountered anything as terrifying as a species that turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and he was beginning to understand why humans were becoming such a dominant force in galactic affairs. It was not because they were stronger or smarter or tougher than other species. It was because they had learned to trust each other in ways that made them unstoppable.